whenever God seems uncooperative. We know that God can do something, we believe that he will, and then he doesn't. And so it may not be the feel-good message that maybe you were hoping for, but it'll help us maybe understand a little bit better the will of God and learn to depend on him during those times when he seems uncooperative. And so I want to start by introducing just a couple of stories real quick. The first one is when I was, I think around 6 or 7 years old, and I had a friend that was a year older than me. And we would ride bikes together. And my parents had bought me this sweet Huffy bike that was, it was blue, had red, white, blue, yellow, and green like padding on the body and on the handlebars, and it had cool streamers. When you're 6, that's cool. And training wheels, because I couldn't ride 2 wheels. And so I would ride this around, and then eventually I got to be like 7, and my friend Justin's like, hey man, you can't come with us anymore if you have training wheels. And I'm like, oh, well, this seems like a lot more work than it's worth probably to continue doing this. And I thought about just not riding the bike anymore. But instead, my friend Justin invited me to spend the night. And he said, by the end of the weekend, you will know how to ride a bike with 2 wheels, or you'll be dead. And so, spoiler, I'm still here. But so that Friday night, I got over to his house around 4, and he said, I've decided we're not going to eat dinner until you can ride a bike with 2 wheels. And I'm like, oh. And he lived on this hill. And so I kept going down, and I'd get a little bit, and then I'd get wobbly, I'd look back, and then boom, and I'd fall. And I had scuffed every knee, elbow, my face, and I kind of walked up the hill, and I was crying, and I'm like, I just don't think I can do it, man. I can't do it anymore. And my friend Justin said, let's pray. Let's pray that God will help you ride this bike. And I'm like, let's do it. So we sat down, and we held hands, and we're like, dear God, please help Daniel learn how to ride a bike, because this hurts and it sucks, and I really want to continue to hang out with him, but I can't if he's got those training wheels. And so I was fired up. I got back on the bike, and what do you know? I rode the bike with no falling, no training wheels, and from then on, I've been really good at biking. I've only fallen one other time, and it hurt real bad, but it was a dumb thing to pray about, maybe. Maybe I was just going to learn anyway because I had spent all afternoon on it. Or maybe God did really intercede and help me learn how to ride a bike so that I didn't lose a body part. I'm not sure. You might say it's a coincidence, but I thought, oh my gosh, God did this for me. This is unbelievable. He's real. That's how I know, is he helped me ride a bike. The second story I want to tell you is about my friends, Tom and Barb, and I have a picture of them to show you. There's Tom, and he's making the bitter beer face. He liked to make that. And then Barb, and there you can put the nicer picture up because I'm sure Tom would be upset. Here's smiling. Tom and Barb, I met them. I just moved back from Tennessee from college, and there's this nice people at the church, and I thought, oh, how sweet that lady brings her dad to church. And I didn't know that they were married. And so someone introduced me to them, and what had happened was their daughter started coming to church, and then they came to see what this church thing was all about and if they should be concerned. And then 6 months later, we were baptizing all 3 of them at our church, and it was just a really cool thing. And they became family. They every time we'd go out to eat, it didn't matter what was going on, they'd be there. They came to everything important in our lives, whether it be graduations or anything that Amelia had going on. They bought us the best Christmas presents, mostly because it was all candy. And my wife doesn't let me eat candy. I sneak it. So they were just an integral part of our lives, and we talked all the time. Tom was cool because he looks like older than dirt, but he would always come up after church and be like, I just need the electric guitar louder. 10 times louder. I want people to feel the worship in the room. And I'm like, Tom, we really can't do that. And he goes, I'll go back there and turn the volume up if I need to. And he just, if it was his choice, it would sound like ZZ Top. That was his thing. And so these were For Mary and I, we were in our 20s, an unlikely friendship with a man who was in his 60s and a woman who's 24 years younger than him. And their story was so cool. And then Barb got diagnosed with cancer in 2006. And it was just out of the blue. She was just going in for a checkup. She wasn't feeling well. She was having a hard time breathing. And she got diagnosed, and she was given 2 years to live. And that hit us hard because we were all kind of a family. We had planted this church on the east side of town, and we were kind of all in each other's lives every day. And I didn't know what to do. And I thought she was the first person I ever knew that like I was ever really close to that had cancer. And I just couldn't understand why during this time where they had just become Christians or they had just given their lives to God, they started to impact people that he would choose to do this. And so we began to pray that she would be healed. And so I'm going to pause that story because I want to get back into our point today. What do we do when God seems uncooperative? When you're a really sincere follower of Jesus, you believe that God could answer your prayer, and then God doesn't. The Apostle Paul experienced this, and I want to look at one specific story and bring out 3 different thoughts, if you're taking notes, about a prayer that he had that I hope will minister to us all. The first one, if you're taking notes, is we need to recognize that true prayer isn't about getting our way, but it's often about surrendering our will. I'll say that again because I didn't put it on the screen. So true prayer isn't about getting our way, but it's often about surrendering our will. It's not just about getting God to do what we want. It's often surrendering our will to what God actually wants. Some people may push back on this, I'm sure, but Jesus prayed in the garden. Before going to the cross, he said, Father, if there's any way you could remove this cup of suffering from me. And at the end, he said, nevertheless, God, not my will, but your will be done. So it's something Jesus had to know as well. Jesus taught us to pray. He said, this is how you pray. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So true prayer isn't about getting God to do what we want. It's surrendering our will to what God wants. And Paul would discover this. And I want to tell you a little bit about Paul in case you didn't grow up around the church. If there's anyone who deserved an answered prayer, it was probably Paul, in my opinion, I think. If you know him, you'd agree. The Apostle Paul, he probably deserved an answered prayer for sure. In his backstory, he hated Christians, and he hated them so much that if he were here, he'd be throwing rocks at me at that point in time. He killed Christians. He despised them. And then he had this miraculous conversion. His whole life was changed from hating Christians to being one of the most effective Christians in the history of the world. He was amazing in what he did. He traveled all over. He wrote half of the New Testament. He essentially traveled on a ship for 20 years, taking the gospel to every part of the known world at the time, took the gospel to Europe. The guy was bold in his faith, to say the least. He had all these visions. He raised the dead. He paid an incredible price for his ministry. He was stoned for his faith, not like recreationally. He had some rocks tossed at him until he died. He was shipwrecked. He was snake bitten. He was beaten with rods and left for dead. And they thought, oh, well, he's dead now, we can leave. And then he was mostly dead, kind of like the Princess Bride. And he got back up, and he was whipped 5 different times like that. And when they would whip a person, they would whip them 39 times, not 40, because if you whipped them 40 times and they died, then it would be considered murder. But if it was 39 times, it was legal at that time. And so you can imagine after round 1 or round 2, and your back is all scarred up, and they say, we're going to whip you again. You're just like, I don't know how I'm going to take this. And Paul did. And he was put in prison over and over again. And the guy endured more than I think you or I could imagine. And what was his reward? So he says, God, you've done all this in my life. And he comes to him in prayer. And I want to read what he says in prayer. It says, if you have your Bibles, it's 2 Corinthians 12:7. It shows us this challenging thing that Paul's talking to God. He says, therefore, in order to keep me from being conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. And that's a challenging text, because Satan brings something into his life, and God allows it. God not only allows it, but God uses it. And God uses it to keep him from becoming conceited. So he has this thorn. Now, what is this thorn? And research, as I was looking it up, the scholars have debated this for years, and everyone kind of has their guess. The Greek word thorn can also be translated as stake, and whenever they would kill a person by running a stake through their body, that's the same word that they would use. So it could be thorn, it could be stake, but whatever it is, it was agonizing to him. He said it was tormenting. And so we might wonder what it is. We don't know, but Paul says it was some sort of physical ailment, and whatever it was given to him. God allowed it, and God used it to keep him from being conceited. Now, as I look around the room, there might be one or two of you, maybe more, that has something in your life, a thorn, some issue, some challenge. You might say maybe your thorn is a person. Don't look at them. Don't point. But it might be a boss that's a challenge. Some of you might be a health issue. Could be something that you've prayed for and prayed for and prayed for and believed that God would take away, and it hasn't gone away. It could be depression, and you're trying all sorts of things, and you're trying to fight. It could be sleep, and you're praying that God would change some circumstance. God, give me reliable transportation to work. Whatever it is you say, God, please change this, and God isn't changing it. And that's tough. We need to remember that prayer isn't about getting our way, but sometimes it's really about surrendering our will and saying, God, even though I really wish you would change this, you're not, and I'm choosing to trust you. Choosing to trust you in the middle of this situation. And the second thing I want to point out, if you're taking notes, this one really hit me hard, and I hope it does for you as well. Prayer reminds us that we're not in control, but it keeps us close to the one who is. It reminds us I'm not the ward of my own life. I can't control everything. And for those of us who are control freaks, that is really rough. I'm not in control. It keeps me close to the one who is, if I allow it. 2 Corinthians 8 says this, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. God, please, I'm begging you. I'm pleading you to take it away with me. So Paul said that 3 times I pleaded with you. And that didn't mean he prayed once in the morning, and then again before he ate lunch, and then again before he ate dinner. I would like to think that these are the 3 significant times of prayer where he stopped whatever he was doing. It could have even been seasons of intentional focused prayer. He begged God, please take this away. And that's quite honestly what we were doing around our friends Tom and Barb. We took moments from every ministry in our church, and we prayed for her. We surrounded her family and prayed for her. As often as we were together, we prayed. We had the entire church, prayer warriors, everyone that I knew talking to God and begging to please take this cancer away. Their daughter's in high school. I would say to God, please don't take her while her daughter's in high school. I'll give you all the credit. I pleaded. I tried to deal, which we try to do. And that's what Paul's saying. 3 seasons, I begged, I pleaded, I fasted, I sought after God. Please take this away. And some of you might be in a season like that right now. God, save my parents' marriage, hold it together. God, please take away this pain, this illness. Please, I'm willing to work. I'll do anything. We try to make deals. And whatever it is in your life that you're begging, you're pleading, this is exactly what Paul was doing. God, please, I trust you. I'm seeking you. Please take this away. I'm only asking for you to do what I've seen you do for others. I've seen you do this, God. I believe that you will. And of course, you're Paul, right? So you think, I've got this. He's going to come through for me. I've endured so much. He's going to come through for me. And think about it, if I think about it in Paul's life, God had already answered so many prayers, too many to count. He used Paul and the miracles through Paul again and again. So of course, God can do this, right? Paul begs, and in 2 Corinthians 12:9, he says, please do this, God. But God said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in your weakness. God, please would you do this one thing? I would serve you so much more effectively if you would do this thing. I've said that before. God, if you do this, I will sell all my belongings. And I try to deal. I could serve you so much more effectively, God, if you would just do this. And God says, no, not on this one. My grace is going to be enough for you. My grace. And what does that mean? What does it mean that his grace is what brings forgiveness for sins, right? We're saved by grace. Grace forgives us. We need to understand grace is so much more than that. In fact, the word translated here as grace is used 155 times in the New Testament. And the word, it means undeserved favor. It means grace, but it also means more than that. In fact, one scholar basically said this is a picture of what God's grace is. He says, grace is when God freely extends himself, leaning and reaching to us because he is disposed to bless and be near us. I'm going to read that again real quick. It is when God freely extends himself, leaning and reaching to us because he is disposed to bless us and be near us. He's saying, leaning in, he's reaching in. He says, I want to reveal myself to you. I want you to feel my presence. And here's what happens. We tend to say this, God, this is what I need. And if you do this, then I'll have what you need. And God says, no, this is not what you need. I am what you need. I am enough. I am sufficient. My grace in this situation is what you need. It's leaning into that presence of God. I could answer this prayer. Yes, I've done it before. I may do something similar in another person, in another case, but you're going to experience me in a way that you haven't before because I'm going to say no. So how do you make it through this? It's God's grace. It's his presence. So when you're going through a tough time, you're like, how are you above water here? Well, I have this grace from God. How are you surviving? Well, I'm not really sure. I've just got this special grace of God, and in the presence of him at this moment is enough. Though I didn't get what I wanted, I didn't get what I asked for, I didn't get what I hoped for, the presence of God, that is enough. So I'll try and explain it this way. It's not a perfect example, but it's the best I can think of. Amelia was 1 year old. It wouldn't be one of my messages without an Amelia story, so I apologize to her. But she was like 1 or 2, and she could barely, she could talk, but she wasn't forming full sentences, and she had to get her adenoids removed because she was having trouble breathing. And our doctor, Dr. Lemire, some of you may know, said, hey, while we're in there, let's just get her tonsils too, you know? And I was like, oh, that sounds mean, but okay. So he did. And so he scheduled it out, and he removed both of those things. And it was tough, even just before surgery, to see your kid hooked up to an IV, that little, not really understanding what's going on. And then when she came out, Dr. Lemire told us that it had been completely successful, no issues whatsoever. She was going to be in pain, but she was going to recover 100%. And so we went in to see her, and she was kind of groggy. And then when she woke up, she just all of a sudden just went and then screamed because she was in so much pain. But then, because her tonsils had been removed, that caused more pain. And so she was just screaming for hours. It was so horrible because there's nothing you can do. And so what I tried to do is just hold her and tell her that we were there for her and that we loved her and it would be over soon. And I just wanted her to know that our presence was there. We were there for her. And it was tough. It was hard not to cry because you're just miserable when your kid's suffering. But in that moment, all I could offer was my presence. And in moments like that, God is offering us his presence, wanting that to be good enough for us. And we might be in pain, we might be crying, but God's presence is there. It's a comforting presence. Sorry, I lost my place there. So God's saying, I want my presence to be a blessing to you. I could do this, but in this case, I want you to experience me in a way you haven't before. My grace is sufficient for you. And what's difficult about that is we always think about what could happen. And for reasons we may never understand, he wants his grace to be enough. So prayer is not about getting our way, but sometimes it's about surrendering our will to God. And what we have to know is that God does not exist to serve us. It took me a long time. Sometimes I still don't know that. That God is not here to serve us. We're here to serve him, to glorify him. And sometimes in our country, particularly, this view of Christianity gets mixed up, where God's there to be our genie or to help us out of a bad situation we've put ourselves in. And we say, God, if you don't do this for me, I'm out. Well, who do we think we are when we say something like that? When did we become God? When do we get to give the restrictions on what happens? We're here to serve and we're here to glorify him. And prayer reminds us that we're not in control. It keeps us close to the one who is, pressing in season after season. God, I'm seeking you. I'm seeking, I'm believing, I'm trusting. Even if you don't do this, God, I will continue to serve, to believe, to trust. So the third point, if you're taking notes, is prayer isn't just about asking, it's about trusting. Not asking, but trusting. It's not about what we want, but it's about trusting that God knows what's best. So I do want to say a prayer asking for things, asking for healing in people's lives, asking for a situation to change. If you were to come to someone who works here at this church, or even just somebody who attends this church and say, hey, I'm going through a rough time, will you pray for me? Of course we are. We believe that God will heal, will fix things, will intercede in whatever's going on in your life. But we also know that we're going to surrender to his will in that moment. So if he doesn't, then we'll come alongside you. We'll be there for you and help you know that God's presence, his grace is enough. That's hard. That's difficult. Even when we believe that God heals, when we believe that God provides, we believe that God still does miracles. And so we don't want to get into the habit of saying, well, I could, but he'd probably say no, so I'm not going to go to him. We want to trust. We want to ask. James says, we have not because we ask not. I used to say that all the time to my daughter when she would ask, say, how come I don't have this? You have not because you ask not. She goes, oh, can I have that? Sure. And then she's like, oh, that's how that works. And then sometimes I'd say no just to mess her up. But, and there's going to be times when God says no. And in that case, it's not just asking, it's trusting. And that's what Paul ended up having to do. Years later, he's looking back at that thorn that he most likely still has, whatever that thorn is, and he's got a different perspective on it. He's saying, this thing that just tormented me, God used it. He used it to keep me from being conceited. He said that in verses 9 and 10. Hey, because of this, my perspective is now changed. I will boast all the more gladly in my weaknesses. Why? So that Christ's power may rest on me. He said, why? For Christ's sake, I do what? I delight in my weaknesses. I delight in insults. I delight in hardships. I delight in persecutions, in difficulties. Why? Because when I'm weak, that means God is strong. I am strong with his power. I delight in these things that I would never ever choose to delight in because I get to experience the presence and the power of God in those things. It's not the successes that bring me closer to God. It's in those times when I can't do anything but depend on God that helps me know him in an intimate way. And Paul's ministry is so much more powerful because God didn't do what he wanted him to do, because when he was weak, he experienced power in a way that he might not otherwise. I delight in insults. I delight in persecutions. What if you changed your perspective? I delight in these troubles I'm going through. I delight that, my health is not where I would want it. I delight that I'm looking for a job. I delight that I having issues in my relationship, because it'll teach me to trust in the presence of God in a way that I might not otherwise. Paul's perspective changed. He's looking back, his perspective changed. People say that time heals all wounds, but everyone knows someone who's been bitter for like 30 years. So that's not exactly true. People are 30 years later still, angry and bitter. Don't point at them. You know people like that. Time didn't heal all wounds with Paul. Time with God's presence heals wounds. It's God's presence. God brings healing. Over time, you can look back and say, maybe a portion of your life, I was really miserable in this moment. And the reason why was because God was teaching me this. Or God was using that to bring me closer to him. Or God used that to help me fix my marriage, or to lean on him when things get hard instead of thinking that I arrogantly have this covered. There's so many things that I can think about that have brought my wife and I closer together, and they're not the joys of marriage, or the harder times in marriage. And God has used those to bless us with a closeness that may not have happened otherwise. And in fact, let me finish the story about Tom and Barb. So in 2006, she was diagnosed. She had 2 years to live, and it was devastating to our church. And she chose to go with an aggressive treatment, and she lost her hair, and she had a nice wig collection. And then she was diagnosed cancer-free in 2008, and she was reluctant to celebrate because she was certain it was not over. And she was right. In 2009, they found more cancer, and the aggressive treatment the doctors recommended to her involved taking one of her lungs. And so they removed her lungs, which, if you knew Barb, she liked to yell at you. So it made it easier for her not to yell at you when she only had one lung. We joked about it much after the operation. But she fought and she recovered after removing a lung. She diagnosed cancer-free, and even that next year went hiking up on Mount Lemmon, which I have a hard enough time doing with 2 lungs. So she kept fighting and fighting, and several times being diagnosed as cancer-free, but never really believing it to be true. In 2015, she went to the doctor, and they found cancer again, and there were no more lungs to remove. It was in her lymph nodes, and she was starting to suspect that her 10-year battle with cancer was coming to an end. But she didn't stop treatment. She wanted to be around. She wanted to continue to serve and work. She wanted to fight. And so with the support of people from our church, driving her to her treatments twice a week, we had like a Barb calendar where each of us would go and support her and take her to different things because she was so weak she couldn't take herself. And so in the midst of that, she's going to these different appointments. Tom suddenly is having an issue. Tom, obviously 24 years, her senior, went to the doctor because he was having trouble keeping food down. And after many tests and pokes and prods, and he was diagnosed with stage 4 stomach cancer and given just weeks to live. It was just a gut check for all of us. And Tom, who was older, kind of immediately accepted it. And so I went over to his house, and he said, "You hear I'm dying?" And he's kind of smiling, and I'm like, I'm not ready to joke about that yet. And he goes, "Well, get ready. It's happening soon." And he asked me to play, at his memorial, he asked me to play Hair of the Dog, which if you know that song, should never be played in a church. He's like, just see if you can sneak it in. And he was having the best time trying to figure it out. And it was so hard for the rest of us who were like, we've been fighting with Barb all this time, and now we're at the end of this with Tom. And just like the doctor said, he passed away just a couple weeks later, and it was heartbreaking. And Barb had been in the ICU and she heard that, Tom was going to pass. And so she checked herself out against doctor's orders and made it home just in time to hold his hand as they took him away. And then she went back. She went back into the ICU. She went into hospice. And at one point, they unplugged her and said, come and say goodbye. And then 12 hours later, she's trying to say something. And the doctor came in and she said, I'm not done fighting. She barely mustered it out. And so they started treating her again. And we thought, oh my gosh, this is the miracle we've been praying for. And she recovered, and she kept getting better and better, and she was removed from the ICU into just the normal hospital, and then from the normal hospital area to a recovery place, and we went and celebrated Tom's birthday for the first time with him not there. And I don't know if you know this, I am a fan of mischief. So this recovery center, there's people there for all sorts of reasons, all sorts of age groups, and Barb was definitely on the younger side of this recovery area. And we went and brought her Mexican food, and she said, I'll only go in this public area if Daniel promises not to get in trouble. And even when she was weak and hanging on, she was harassing me, which I loved. And so we went in there, and there's an older guy who came and said, hey, can I watch TV? And these older ladies next to him said, yeah, as long as you don't turn the volume too loud. So he turns it on, and then I noticed that there's another remote on my table. And so I just point it with the volume all the way up at the table. 4 or 5 times these older ladies yelled at the guy, quit turning it up. And Barb's so mad at me, but she's so weak she can't yell, so she just keeps hitting me in the ribs over and over. It's one of my favorite memories. And then she went back into the ICU, and we'd been praying for her. We had all this large group of people. There was probably 30 of us she was never alone in the hospital or anything. We were all there in shifts praying for her. We had everyone we knew praying for her, people we didn't know. Other churches were praying for her. And we believed she's a fighter. God's brought her all this way. He's going to continue to heal her. She's going to get better. She's going to go home, and we're praying that. And about 8 weeks after Tom, she went home, but not her earthly home. And it was rough. I have to say, it's probably the worst year of my life. These 2 close friends, to lose them within 8 weeks. I cried a lot. I'm not a public crier, so this is really difficult for me. I put these tissues up here just in case. But I would wait until my family went to bed, and I'd watch videos I had of Tom or listen to voicemails I had from Barb, who was in and out of the hospital and calling to see how Amelia was doing or how Mary was feeling. These are people who cared so much more about other people than themselves. They were never defined by the illness that was taking them. They were only defined by their Savior and their love for him, their desire to serve him, and everyone they touched was affected by that. And so we had a memorial for him, a joint memorial, because we were waiting for Barb to be healthy to have a memorial for Tom, and obviously that didn't happen. And so we did this joint memorial, and we almost had to change the venue because we thought the church wasn't going to be big enough to hold as many people wanted to come and say their respects and talk and celebrate their lives. And I gave Tom's eulogy, and I want to read a portion of it. I said, it's been a tough year. It's time like this when we're humans, we want to know why. Why did this happen? Why did we have to lose our friends like this? Romans 8:28 says, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. There are things that we just don't get to know. We don't get answers to. I know that God is a God of love. And when stuff like this happens, it's easy to forget that because what we're going through is hard, maybe even the toughest thing we've ever had to go through in our lives. And I know that Tom and Barb are in heaven. We didn't lose our friends. When you lose something, it's because you don't know where it is. Tom and Barb are rejoicing in heaven, and we should celebrate that. So even then, I guess I was prepping for this message. I'm a better man for knowing Tom. I'm a better person for knowing Barb. And I'm not alone in that. So many people came forward that day. I think the service was an hour and a half in length because there was 8 people who wanted to talk. And all these people just celebrating how Tom and Barb had served them in one way or another. Tom, who was 74 years old when he died, was still climbing up on roofs and fixing air conditioners because that's what he was by trade, an air conditioning repair person. And he wouldn't have you be paying an overpriced serviceman to come out. He would get up there when it was 120 degrees. And story by story, all these people coming forward and saying how they got to know who God was by getting to know Tom and Barb. And I probably wouldn't have said it the first year or maybe just even a couple years into it, but knowing what I know now, with the presence and goodness of God, I would say that the worst year of my life is something that I wouldn't change because I saw the way God used it. And I don't know what it is right now, and I don't want to play it down at all of what anyone's going through. And you might be equally or more painful than what our family endured and the stories I told today. But what I know is no matter how bad this moment is, the goodness of God is better. And even better over time, the goodness of God can heal. If God doesn't do exactly what you wanted him to do, it doesn't make God any less God. It makes him more God. And we continue asking. We're going to continue to believe for miracles. And we're going to just do that. We're going to ask. We're going to trust because prayer isn't about getting God to do what we want. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Here's what I want, God, but not my will, your will. And we're going to keep praying anytime there's something difficult that we don't understand. We're going to remember that prayer reminds us that we're not in control. It keeps us close to the one it is. So whatever thorn is in our lives, because we have the different versions of thorns at one point or another, my prayer is years from now, you'll look back and go, wow, I didn't like it. I didn't understand it, but God did use it in my life. Because even when life doesn't feel good, our God is still good. He's always good. He can't be anything but good. We serve and worship a good God. Let's pray. Father, I pray.